information session. We're going to share with you some of the information that you'll need to help you on your doctoral journey. In my case, I assumed that progressing to a doctorate was almost a straightforward extension of my master's degree experience and work. Little did I know that the process is quite different, and that universities, their departments and academics have different views on the suitability of topics for research. So I spent several months of frustration trying to put together something the university and departments considered suitable for adding to their research profile. Many of our MBA graduates, of whom there have been some 5,000 or more, and other friends have told us that they would like to investigate the possibility of adding the doctor title to their resume. I therefore have invited my good friend and colleague, Dr. David Bright, to share with us some of his experiences. And as you'll see, Dr. David Bright is a fellow of the University of Hull, which reflects over 40 years of experience in higher education institutions. This includes the business schools of Durham University, Hull University, and Greenwich School of Management. David has also considerable experience as an international consultant in higher education issues, including establishing doctoral programs and reviewing master's degree programs. David's academic specialisms cover the fields of organizational behavior and human resource management. He's lectured on academic programs around the world, and relevant to today's talk, David has supervised and examined many doctoral students and projects. So I'll say good morning to you, David. It's good afternoon here where I am in Southern Asia. And thanks for joining us today and spending your time telling us and sharing some of your wisdom. You know, I often get asked at the end of MBA and MSc or MA courses whether our students can do a further qualification, and then if they can, how to go about identifying and then being accepted and preparing for such a program. Because when I made this start some years ago, some 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, it was absolute torture, because I found very quickly how little I knew about the process, although I was involved in higher education. So, David, we would really benefit from your overview here, please.
Good morning, Rob, from a very snowy England. We're having our couple of weeks of the year where we do get snow here, and it's quite different, I think, from where you are. Yes, indeed, I think I'm happy to talk about doctorates, because for many years, like you, I've been asked about by students, I'd like to do a PhD, I'd like to do a DBA, and I said, don't do it, because it's so different than doing an MBA or an MSc. Nowadays, I say, don't do it without adequate preparation, because you mentioned the word frustration, Rob, and there is frustration because a lot of the students do not understand the nature of these degrees and how different they are than a taught master's program, particularly a taught master's program such as the MBA, which brings into brings into focus several subjects for the students. Most MBAs cover about 10 to 12 different related business subjects. So when you're doing that, and you're doing that with 30 or more other students, that's one thing. When you're doing a doctorate program, whether it's a PhD, a DBA or whatever, which I can talk about, an awful lot of that time is spent on your own. And it's really important that the students understand that from day one, really. And I can also add to this, Rob, by saying to you that whilst I got my own doctorate many years ago, my wife has only recently completed a PhD. So I can also add value, if you like, from some of her experience. She actually passed her doctoral viva in August this year, and she's now waiting for the pandemic to subside so she can have a graduation, so I can use some information that she's given to me that I've observed.
Well, that's great, and many congratulations to Dr. Bright, the Karen, as well as to Dr. Bright, the David, the husband. But perhaps the people who are watching this video would find it useful to get some idea exactly what a doctorate is and what are the different types of doctorate. You and I know that there are several different types, but people seem to think that there's really only a PhD and that's it, more or less.
Well, the PhD was the original. That was the original product, course, or theme of study, which was run in universities around the world many, many hundreds of years ago. Out of that, we had the medical doctorates, and of course, they are different. We're not talking about medical doctorates. I would also like to suggest, Rob, that I restrict my comments to the fields of social science, business management, law, politics, this area. And originally, a doctorate program was something that identified that the student has been able to make a unique contribution to the area of knowledge in a particular field. So, for example, if you say human resource management, which is one of my areas of supposed expertise, you might be looking, for example, as my wife did, about negotiation behavior differences between people living, if you like, in the GCC area of what we used to call the Middle East and in the UK. So you're making a contribution. As well as the PhDs, which are the original ones, we have seen in the last 20 to 30 years the developments and the rise of a number of others, which I'll call professional doctorates, just for simplicity. Within those, we have things like D-Literature, Doctor of Literature, D-Music, D-Education, and one that's grown particularly in recent years, in the last decade, is the doctorate, or the doctorate in business administration. And perhaps I could spend some time distinguishing between the two, the PhD and the DPA. There are quite a few differences, but the PhD is basically a book based on your own research or one's own research in a particular narrowish field in the chosen subject. Usually these days, universities for a PhD would expect the student to write between 80,000 and 100,000 words for a PhD. When I did mine a long time ago, universities were quite relaxed about the number of words, and I believe mine came in at something like 130,000 words. These days, universities quite rightly are tighter. So if you take a book of 80 to 100,000 words there, you contrast that with a doctorate in business administration, where there is some part of that degree is based on taught modules. It's quite common on the DBA to do some before taught modules, maybe some research taught modules, maybe some strategic thinking taught modules. So you do so much taught, and that's based on an MBA as if you like an entry criteria, and then probably something like 50,000 to 80,000 or to 70,000 words in terms of the actual contribution, the original contribution. Now let me be absolutely clear on this. Both the PhD and the GPA require originality. That's one of the areas that students do quite often misunderstand. You've got to do something original in both, but with the DPA, it tends to be a shorter thesis, and it tends to be often dealing with actual business problems rather than simply some intellectual question that the student wishes to answer. So that's the, if you like, the DBA, the PhD. There are others, as I said, I've examined.
Sorry to interrupt, David. So if I'm reading this, what you're saying correctly, all the different types of doctorate, of which there are many, and I guess that they're all of the same academic standing. They all carry the same doctorate title. Is that correct?
I think so. More and more these days, Rob, the standing between the traditional PhD and the professional doctorate is becoming more equivalent, is becoming more equal. Perhaps originally, when the professional doctorates were not as well known as they are now, there might have been some first division, second division thinking. But these days, certainly, and I've examined both, many of them, I'm not aware of any great status difference between them, particularly in the field of business and management education, which you and I have been working in for many years.
Indeed. Again, one of the points that I think you made very clearly is that in all the cases, the university, the department, and the final assessment of the doctorate is based on a strong element of originality, so that the researcher, if I can call them that, is making a big contribution to knowledge, whether it be in the PhD route into more sort of focused academic learning, or whether it's in the professional, through the professional route in practical matters of business or engineering or psychology or music. Is that correct, David? Yeah.
Yes, particularly with the, if I can concentrate, Rob, on the PhD DBA split.
Yeah.
There is an aspect of research which is called action research. And action research is where the researcher can actually make a contribution to solving business problems as he or she develops their original contribution.
Okay.
So the idea of action research, for example, I had a student a few years ago. He was looking at the degree of best fit of what is called the balanced scorecard. I know you know what that is, the balanced scorecard, into German SMEs. And whilst along the way, he managed to make a contribution to improve productivity in one or two German SMEs, he still had to go on and write up the original piece of work as if it were almost a PhD. So he's actually doing two things. He's able to do two things. He's contributing to solving a business problem today. He's also setting out some original thinking for other people to benefit from in the future.
Good value for the research then.
Yeah, that's right. And action research, Rob, as you know, has been around for about 40, 50 years now. And it's very much associated with the fields that we work in, which is business management, decision making.
From what I've seen, David, just moving on from there a little bit, it seems that there are a number of common elements that the student needs to prepare for getting onto a doctorate program. They need to look at, be familiar with different types of research and statistics, and then also be very conversant with the current literature, because obviously, if there isn't enough literature in the field of their study, then they're going to be hard pressed to be able to show how they've moved the boundaries of knowledge forward. So if I'm correct, the students need to have a sort of an outline of what it is that they're wanting to do. They then need to look at how they're going to improve their research up quite a few pegs from the sort of level of research that they've done maybe at their master's degree. And then they need to be able to show that they've studied the literature, because they need to be able to convince the university, the department, a supervisor, that this is something that's doable, and that it's something which is going to be worthwhile and make a strong inclusion into the university or department's research. And this is all prior to making the formal preparation, I guess. Would you say that's the sort of thing?
I think that's very well put. If I can take it from a university perspective, certainly based in England, in the UK, universities are not helped in any way, shape or form by students joining doctoral programs, but then don't complete. So it's not the university's interest, because they have various checks and balances about this. So what a university would want to be comparatively assured about before the student was accepted was that his or her work was potentially leading to good quality research. Secondly, often that this fitted in with the direction the department or the unit of the university wanted to go. Thirdly, was that student in the future likely to be able to write up his or her findings, perhaps with other colleagues, to be published in academic journals, and again giving what shall we say, a good reputation to the university. So, you know, it's not in the university's interest to take this decision very lightly, and they don't. They don't.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, with UK universities, just my observation is that they have they protect their reputations and want to enhance their reputations as being the primary directive. It's unwritten, I think, but I perceive that that's the way that they want to go. And in fact, I know that in the UK there are statistics on the number of PhD starts and the number of PhD completions, and this is a source of some concern to the senior management, the senior academics within the university, to make sure that they are completing a good proportion of their doctoral degrees, because these are really the main flag waving exercises for the university. Is that your thinking too, David?
Yes, it is. I mean, when I did mine, I got mine, would you believe, in 1980. There was comparatively little control of this activity. Nowadays, in universities in the UK and elsewhere, there are various checks, an annual check probably, maybe a 6-monthly check that the work is going well. Occasionally, the work is sort of examined to see whether it's going to lead to a doctoral quality end product. I mean, I should add, Rob, that it's not at all unusual for a university to register the student, not for a PhD or a DPA, but for an MPhil stroke DPA stroke PhD. The idea is that in the first instance, they will register you for the slightly lower level qualification, but hopefully you'll progress to the higher level if your work looks promising after a year, 18 months, something like that. Say you've said it, I've said it, there is no value whatsoever in a university taking on students for PhDs or DPAs where the student does not complete. Another thing I'd like to add, Rob, is that you can actually do a doctorate in different ways. The traditional one is the full-time version. Full-time version would mean that the student, let's say we'll take the student, shall we say, from Oman or somewhere like this. The student from Oman, and we've had them in my universities, was probably getting funding from his or her employer or from the government, would come over to the UK and spend 4 years, let's say, in a UK department, being registered on a full-time basis. Also, we get part-time students, and my wife was a part-time student at a university about an hour's travel away. The part-time student would be required to be on campus for certain sessions, for certain events, for certain classes, but then they work from home or whatever they wanted to for the remainder of the time. And the third one, which is perhaps particularly relevant to our discussion today, is students doing either their doctorate program online completely, or in some sort of hybrid model where they might be required to attend, let's say, the university for 3 weeks a year, maybe for different events. But fundamentally, their work will be done online, and tuition will be offered via the university, via the supervisor, in the same way we're talking about now. It would be done on Zoom. Or...
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if the online provision that we're looking at the moment comes to fruition in the next couple of months, there's nothing at all to prevent the students at a time when the pandemic eases off actually coming and taking up some of the work, the research at the university on campus at a time when it's more convenient. But as we're finding now, more and more of programs are having to be offered, and students like them to be offered online with part of that. Some flexibility, as you called it, I think a hybrid model, so that the students can actually come along. And certainly, as we found with many of the degrees we've worked on, students like to come along for part of the programme, and at the very least, they like to come along for the graduation. And the difference in the types of programme, of the different types of doctor, and the difference in the study method, but none of those preclude the student from coming along and participating on campus in part-time and or full-time online, and then coming along when they graduate to the graduation ceremony with all the other students. Am I correct in that, David?
Yeah, correct. And also, importantly for some students, it does not say on your degree certificate, this was done online, this was done part-time, this was done full-time. You are a doctor of the university, of whichever university you studied at. As it happened yesterday, I was looking for another purpose at the doctoral regulations for a very prestigious British university. And it's notable nowadays, I said to you a few minutes ago, that when I did mine, there was very few checks and balances. It's notable now how many checks and balances there are. And these are really designed to encourage the student to enjoy what they're doing and to complete it within the time frame.
Interesting, just to take the point that you're making on about the prestigious universities. I know that the various ministries of education throughout the GCC and other parts of the world struggle a little to come up with some sort of comparison and look at the effectiveness of different educational systems. Am I right in thinking that what I did see, I saw one student was very keen to look at international strategic security situations. Now, if you said, well, then he went to Oxford or Harvard or what have you, that's, I'm sure that they have eminent professors who can teach at those universities, but there are specialists in other universities where the student probably has a greater chance of being accepted. Because if we look at, I think, somebody like yourself and maybe the other higher echelons of a university department can only perhaps supervise 5 or 8 students at one time. And if you're looking after them for anything up to 5 years, that takes you out of the game for a long period. So that's another reason, I think, why universities tend to be a little bit careful on their allocation of PhDs. And then from the student's perspective, it makes it a little bit tricky for them to be able to target the right sort of supervisor who's going to give them the guidance, not only to make their research work credible, but to help them complete it.
Again, some good points there. Let me just deal with the different groupings of universities first. In the UK, you will have heard of the Russell Group. The Russell Group has 22, I think, members, and these tend to be the more prestigious universities, the Oxfords, the Cambridges, the Durhams, etc. Getting into, as a student, getting into these universities to do a doctoral will be quite difficult. Because they have a lot of demand and they do not want to be associated with any doctoral work that isn't successful. So in my opinion, it's probably not very wise for most applications for doctors to go to this group because they are difficult to get in. And what I often say is, unless you are known to them, for example, you might have done another degree in this particular institution, say, for example, at Durham, and they know your work is very good. That's one factor. Another factor perhaps is, does your university back in Oman or Saudi or Bahrain, or does your ministry in Bahrain have any ties with this institution? If it does, fine. But if it doesn't, I think it's going to be difficult for you to get in there. But you're absolutely right. There's some very good people, some very good supervisors in every university. When I was at one university full time, it became known that I was helpful, shall we say, to students from the Middle East. And it was almost like we had a Bahraini trade union official. He wasn't a trade union official. We acted like a trade union official, sending these students to see me. So I had my own informal, if you like, channel of students. And I'm very happy to say they all passed. They've all done. You mentioned also, Rob, the number of students. I think 7 or 8 students is probably a limit for me, for any academic who is teaching and who's doing admin or whatever. Maybe 4, maybe 5 would be a good number. And also, most academics like to take students from different countries. So let's say you might have a couple of students, say from Saudi Arabia, you might have one from China, you might have one from Thailand, you might have one from Poland. I mean, that's quite a typical mixture. Yeah. And I think what a good academic will do then is try to get the students learning from each other. I remember when I used to be full-time here, when one of my full-time PhDs had passed, was successful, I got them to lead a seminar for all the other ones on what to look out for in a Viva, what sort of questions you're going to get, how to answer them, etc. But there are many things before we get to the Viva, and as you will know, we drafted a 3-day course, which we'll be offering later in 2021, to deal with some of these. So, for example, what's the culture about? You know, what do we mean by originality? How deep do you have to go? What is what we call the upgrade seminar all about? What's research philosophy about? How much do I have to write? What's my responsibility? What's the supervisor's? Ultimately leading up to the construction of a very important document called the research proposal.
So excuse me, Dave, this is the program that we've been looking at over 3 days, and over what sort of time period would that? So if I was to come on to this, I'd commit to come on for 3 or 4 days onto the program. Is that over, say, 2 months? So that during that period?
Yes, Rob, I think the way we were thinking when I last worked on this draft was that we'd split the program into two parts. First of all, will be 3 days equivalent set over 3 months. And the idea, this would be the tour part, what it's like to do a PhD, what the culture, even the higher education culture. I don't think students from the Middle East have a problem, but for example, students from China often take a while to adjust in terms of the culture, because in China, higher education traditionally, the feeling is that the professor is the master, and you listen to what the professor says and you obey what the professor says. Whereas if you're coming to the UK, particularly to look at research degrees, we expect you to challenge. So we work on that. We'd also work on things like the point you made earlier. What sort of seminal literature would you be expected to be familiar with? What sort of non-seminal literature? For example, a good PhD student or a good DPA student will go beyond the textbooks into the academic articles, and hopefully on occasion into unpublished doctoral theses also. So we do that. So that's the first part of the program. The second part is an optional part of the program. It's where we offer a one-to-one service in helping the student to write their research proposal. Because so
if I get what we're saying here, we've had a look at what is a doctorate, the different types of doctorate, how universities regard doctorates, how a student might get onto this and why. And as you know, part of my difficulty with the getting onto the doctoral program was that there was no guidance at all. I just was sort of fishing around in the dark. So the idea of having over a time period, say 3 months, 1 day a month, whereby we could look at the various elements that go into making the research proposal, because I think it's like starting off on a journey. That the tighter the direction, then the more likely it is that you're going to reach the destination. I'm sure there's a Chinese proverb which equates to that. And then finally coming up with a proposal, which is something which you can be confident is something that you can do, or one can do as a student, one can complete as a student, and which is probably going to be acceptable and interesting and attractive to universities. So there's 2 parts. The first part being the if you like, the taught and the programmed part, and the second part is the more one-on-one development of the actual research proposal. Am I correct in that?
You're correct. And also, I'd like to say a little bit more about the research proposal. I remember having a debate with my friend and former colleague, my dean, Professor Jackson, and we were discussing between us about to what degree did we expect a research proposal to be absolutely completed? Because, as you've sort of suggested, often what you come out with is not what you went in with in terms of ideas. You might find ideas change along the way. So, we talk about how can a research proposal be at one level and yet still be open to be amended. Also, I would say to any person doing or thinking about doing a doctoral program, number one, it must be your idea, not your boss's idea, not your partner's idea. It's your idea. You've got to be committed to it. Number two, it's got to interest you because you're doing this for years. If you're not interested in it, it'll kill you. And thirdly, it's got to be feasible. So if somebody came to me and said, I want to do a comparative survey for my doctorate of 28 countries of the work of 15 different social scientists on identifying national culture. And I want to come out with a new, completely finalized version of a model to link national culture to behavior in the workplace. I'm saying you can't do that. It's just too big, so the idea is that we're able to give in our training program the sort of advice that a good supervisor would give you anyway. The difference is we're doing it before you apply. The supervisor's doing it probably months after you have applied.
Well, that was my problem, David. Sorry to interrupt you then. I spent several months doing my initial research and reading around the subject, and then made the what I thought was a pretty good proposal. And even the Pro Vice Chancellor said it's a really good proposal, but it's not something that we're interested in.
Yeah.
So I'd spent 6 or 7 months putting this thing together very carefully, and then only to find that it was, and that's quite, it's quite disturbing, really, and quite saddening.
Let me give you and anybody watching this some advice. Helpfully, a lot of departments now in universities ask the member of staff to say what they're interested in taking on as research degrees.
So after the students have done the 3 days of program with us, and we've helped them, hopefully they've decided to come on and we've helped them with their proposal, we can have a product which should be, a proposal which should be attractive to various universities in different parts of the world even.
I would say the proposal on the basis of what you said, the proposal would be of a bit, if you like, a good quality proposal. That still doesn't mean to say that's going to be accepted. I was just thinking while you're talking, at my last, well, at the university I'm now visiting fellow at, I have two colleagues there, one of whom is an expert on talent management, and the other one is a keen researcher on older workers. So if you wanted to do a doctorate program on talent management, I would direct you to, or the university department would direct you to Professor X. Whereas if you wanted to look at older workers, he's not interested in that. You go to the other guy. And that's, I think universities have got better at doing that.
Yes, and presumably that would be part of the guidance that the program would give to candidates to say, well, if you keep it in this sort of area, there's more of a likelihood that your good proposal will be accepted by a particular university. Yeah.
Now, go back to how we started this, Rob. You were talking about in your experience of running MBAs and MSCs in different countries. So the idea is, if somebody said to you, I'm just doing a doctorate in, what shall we say, customer relationship marketing, let's say, and you, with respect, wouldn't know anybody who's doing that, but you might know somebody like me who knows different departments, and then you could say, well, I'll find out from you which universities might be interested in doing that. And that's that's part of the service that we would do. In our program, we are not saying, we can't guarantee that students will be accepted onto a program, but what we can do is guide them to those universities we think are more likely to accept that type of.
And better prepared to.
That's right. If I'd like to say one more thing, which is very important, particularly when we are taking students from countries where English is their second language. So I'm talking here particularly about China. I'm talking about perhaps Saudi Arabia, maybe talking about other Gulf countries as well. You and I have worked in those areas a long time, and we know that the spoken English of many people there is very, very good. But when you're doing a doctoral program, what's really important is your ability to explain the nuances, the detail, the fine detail. For that, you need a good quality written English and spoken English. So whilst an IELTS score, for example, of say 6.5 would be acceptable to get you into most MBAs, my own view is I think I'd be looking for it. Karen, I would be looking for a figure of 7.
Yes.
For a doctoral program. Now, it may be.
Sorry, go ahead.
It may well be that the student is coming over, 2 months a year for 4 years, they will gain that. But I would recommend that they work at that, because particularly with online programs, I've examined nearly 60 doctoral programs in my time. And I have to tell you, I will not pass one where the written English is not that good, because what happens is, as an examiner, there's usually an external examiner and an internal examiner. And we sign off the various forms in the university to say that this doctoral program has met the criteria. If the English isn't good enough, it can't have met the criteria, and therefore we're doing ourselves a disservice and the university. So that's a small thing, but I know it's one thing that can be improved on fairly quickly.
Well, as we know, the type of programs that we are looking at in terms of the next step after the student has gone through this research process is DBA, PhD, online. We know that the standard of English does increase. It does improve, certainly in oral English. In terms of the written English, I've recently started using a proprietary program for which you can set parameters on what sort of nuances, whether it's an academic paper, and it will guide you. And so that in itself is an excellent learning tool. It's called, dare I say, Grammarly. It's called Grammarly.
Yeah, I agree. And again, my wife, when she did her doctoral piece of work, you could tell in the first year compared to the second and third years, she was writing at different levels. She was writing at the first year, maybe MBA level. There's nothing wrong with that. But you've got to go beyond that. So anything you can use to get into that detailed analysis, nuanced analysis
Yes.
of a total thesis, anything you can use is good. I mean, there's nothing more helpful than you and I, let's say if you were the student and I was the professor, you and I talking, me reading your work and making comments on it. That's the simplest way to do it. The other thing I would like to say at this point, Rob, is that remember all the way through, it is the student's doctorate, not the professor's. Professor, the supervisor is there to steer. Most universities now, if not all of them, have a set of expectation guidelines. How often you would see your supervisor, would you have a second supervisor, what happens at the end of each year. So there are good, compared to when you were looking around, there are good clear rules now in most of them. The university my wife did hers at, they required the student to have every year an annual review examination where they will be, they'd submit so many thousand words. This will be read every year by a different member of staff, and then they'd be questioned on it.
The great thing now, of course, is that the availability of online access means that the sort of having to have a diary date and get on a bus and train or plane to meet your professor is now just a question of setting a time and date and using Teams or Zoom.
That's right. In a sad way, the pandemic has made things like this a lot easier in a way, because I think getting students face to face for part of their program is a good thing. I do. But certainly we can make great progress online. The quality of support systems online is very good now. Most of us have got a modicum of ability with online learning. And in fact, one of the things I have to remember, I'm sure you do, is every hour I have to get up for so many minutes to walk around, because the danger is we spend too much time now in front of the computer. But yes, indeed. And also, there's nothing to stop, is there, Rob? I mean, there's nothing to stop. If the University X had, let's say, 6 students in the Gulf area online, there's nothing to stop that university saying, every 6 weeks, we will have a collective tutorial. You're all invited. And this particular one will be led by me or you or whatever. We can do all sorts of things like that.
Indeed, and that makes it, and in fact, you made a very valuable point there, because I think we've just popped over the hour in our meeting today, and there were just a couple of other points that I thought were worth mentioning. People don't have a clear idea of the sort of investment that they have to make to do a PhD or a doctorate in the UK. In your experience, David, what sort of fees are they looking per annum?
Well, they're not cheap. They're not cheap. And also the sort of relationship we're talking about, Rob, is probably deemed to be an international student studying somewhere else. So let's say a student from Saudi Arabia studying with a British university would probably pay more fees than a British student studying with a British university. The cheapest ones of all are where you're a part-time student. But that's not available to most of our students. But it's probably, I mean, there are different figures. I've got some figures, and there are figures around. Often there's a correlation between the status of the university and the fee. But don't let that put you off. If in this document here, which is the Sunday Times Good University Guide, there are 131 British universities. And it doesn't mean that because a university is ranked, let's say, number 70, it isn't a good university. The rankings are very, very occasionally, I wouldn't say idiosyncratic, but they're weighted in some areas. But also you'll find often the difference between the university ranked at number 60 and one at number 70 is fairly small. You know, it may well have got a couple more
narrow band that they operate in. You know, if correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen some universities offering programs on a per annum basis at between £8,000, and I've seen others north of £15,000 per year. So if you're looking at a 4 or potentially 5 year process for your doctorate, that's 35 to 50, £60,000 of investment. So I think this really suggests that the idea of having a guided preparation program is probably a good investment. And what I would say is that for students who or potential researchers who would like to come on and look at this sort of process a little bit more, they can see it on the MDCI website. And if they would like more details, then they can contact me. And I'm sure if you need more academic details, then we can guide you to Dr. Bright, and that we can answer your questions that way. I don't know if there were any other points that you thought were
one, Rob, just related to that point. Right at the beginning of the session, you said there may be students who want to add a doctorate to their resume or something like that. But let's go beyond that a minute. Why do you want to do it? Why should a person want to do it? First of all, for academics like me, it is almost required now you have a doctorate. It is expected that you have a doctorate. But for many people in many countries, it's not required, but it's advantageous. Certainly in the Gulf area and the GCC area is advantageous. But you must ask yourself, is it worth me putting all that time in and all that money into it? And you've got to be absolutely clear on this, because as you and I know very well, an organisation like MDCI have been working hard with universities to try and offer a range of programs. So another type of program might be a better bet for you. It might be, for example, you just done your MBA, now you want to do a particularly specific master's degree. So you might want to do an MSc.
Like a top-up MSc in consultancy or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly. So what I would say is, and I know you do this, don't go into this blindly. Take advice from it. And I'll come back to the idea.
Sorry, the idea then of having a preliminary course to test your level of commitment and understanding is not only a wise investment of your time, but also a good guide to whether or not the investment of anywhere between £30,000 and £60,000 is going to be worth it to you in the long run.
That's exactly right. That's and there's no culpability, there's no shame in having done all that, deciding that the doctorate is not what you need, not what you want. My wife, as I say, she's just got hers, and we've talked a lot about it. And in a way, intelligence is almost taken for granted when you do a doctorate. I think the key thing that separates successful doctoral students from unsuccessful ones, and there are very few doctoral students who fail the Viva. The vast majority who don't complete decide to drop out. And we have to come up with, we agree on the term that will make the difference between you having a doctorate and not. It's doggedness, it's determination. You know, when you're not feeling like it, you go in that room and you write, do your best for 8 hours. When you're worried about your methodology, you've got the sense to take advice from somebody. It's all about that. It's all about people like me giving advice to people about things.
Sort of a marathon mentality in some ways, a kind of a marathon mentality.
Exactly so. I mean, there's a race, isn't there, that goes in the GCC area, isn't it? One of these long races, isn't it? One
Oh,
sort of.
One of our students once, I saw him one day, and he said, "I did the Bahrain Marathon on such and such a day," and I said, "I bet that was tiring." He said, "Well, yes, because I as soon as I finished, I started and did another one
That sounds like,
immediately following."
yes, I think it's if you think an MBA is long and demanding, it is, but doing a doctorate is longer and more demanding, but perhaps equally, if not more, rewarding at the end of it.
David, we've taken up a lot of your time, and what I would say, just to reiterate, is that if people would like to talk to me or you, or get more information, they can come onto the MDCI website. And I think that when we put this brief video online, we'll also put some other contact details. So perhaps at this stage we'll draw a line underneath it and say, thank you very much, Dr. David Bright, for the benefit of your years of wisdom, which I always value. I wish I'd had you around to guide me when I was looking at my PhD those many years ago. And hopefully this will be of benefit to other people who'll contact us. We're going to be starting, I think, in March, the preparation program in March, I think, aren't we? So
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so within about the next 4 or 5 weeks, we'll be starting the program. We can send you all the full details, but you will see an outline on the MDC website. So again, thank you for listening to our video, and thank you very much indeed to Dr. David Bright for your excellent pearls of wisdom. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.